Bismillah. Okay, hi. I am pleased to be joined by Rida and Miriam from Ohio. And we're talking today about Eid letter writing to incarcerated Muslims, which I found out about I think 5 years ago, because I was before that a fan of Hanif, a poet who I'll tell you all about in another program. And these are his co-organizers, Rida and Miriam. So, Salam, Yali Mudad, how are you guys?
Walaikum assalam. Very happy to be here. Really interested in hearing more about the radio. I was really blown away by the introduction. So I'm happy to be here and share this space with you.
Wow, the introduction that this is Suburban Desi Radio.
Yeah,
Okay. And
I
Miriam,
like that.
yeah, it's an interesting concept. I'll tell you way more about it because I think it is, frankly, very related to. I don't know exactly what all of your mission is, but there's so many places that are. I kind of think about things like there's cities and then there's suburbs, and there's such a disconnect in temperament and like organizing in ways that. But this population of Desis and Muslims in these suburbs is enormous, and so I think there's a huge, huge bridge to gap to bridge. And so this is one of the ways to reach people is this funny radio station, which is very, very close to my heart. But yeah. But Miriam, introduce yourself, please.
Hi, Assalamu alaikum. I'm doing really well. I'm really happy to be here. Like Rida said, I really enjoyed and resonated with the things you were saying about the Urdu language and its connections to like more like structural systems at the beginning of the session. Yeah, I'm here calling in from Columbus, Ohio.
Hmm. And tell us a bit about. Thanks first of all for the appreciation. It means a lot. Um, and tell us a bit about Eid letter writing to incarcerated Muslims and what you do for them and what their accomplishments were this year. I see. It seems to me like it seems to scale. It seemed to scale a lot this year. A lot of big accomplishments.
Yeah, definitely. Alhamdulillah, our reach really grew this year. I'll speak a little bit and then I'll throw it to you, Rida, if you want to add anything. But we are a small group of organizers with roots in Ohio, organizing to build connectivity with our brothers and sisters on the inside. Um, Definitely focused on this work through a political lens, but also through just like a humanitarian lens, in the ways that we uplift the struggles of incarcerated Muslims, both in Ohio, but across the United States and across the world more broadly too. Um, yeah, this year we had quite a big webinar and letter writing session, alhamdulillah, with attendees. Across the United States and also across the world, which is something we were able to do because this year's webinar was virtual, and we had folks scan in their letters instead of writing them physically, which we can definitely talk about more later, as to why we chose to do our Eid letter writing session that way. Um, and yeah, we're a democratically organized organization, meaning there's no like hierarchy, there's no like president, treasurer, those kind of positions. We all make decisions on a consensus basis. Yeah, and Rida, I'll pass it to you.
Mariam, I think you did a really good job of summarizing. But yeah, we kind of grew from this need to bridge the gap between the free world Muslims and those incarcerated, kind of with the recognition that incarceration is this isolating and dehumanizing form of imprisonment that Muslims are kind of targeted and put behind bars and then forgotten by the state, and then sometimes by the Ummah. So the project kind of began around, from my understanding, around Ramadan and Eid, because those are sacred times that kind of heighten the feeling of being cut off for those incarcerated. And also times where you should feel most connected to God and community. So yeah, kind of resonating everything else Mariam said. We,
Very nice.
I'm,
Yes. Oh no, finish your thought. I'm sorry.
no, go ahead.
Okay, well, this is a beautiful introduction. Like I said, I will just briefly reintroduce from my perspective. I found Elim 5 years ago. The whole thing is super simple. Simple. During Ramzan, in the third week, write letters to an incarcerated Muslims with your hand and mail a letter, which is something that I was saying in the introduction. When's the last time you wrote a letter in general? We don't do that. And I'm a crazy person, so I'll tell you about how much actually writing a letter is important for us in general because we don't even know how to talk anymore from our heart. We just are not able to do that because we're typing or we're just not very thoughtful. But the deliberation it takes to write from your hands is like it's a whole experience. You're having to talk from your heart. And then, like you said, bridging the gap from I am a free person in a free world using my phone to look at all the terrible things, and I feel as though this is bad and that's bad, and they are bad, and we have way too much access to all this stuff. That's hard, and we feel as though we are on a certain side of things. But to disconnect from that and take part in action, the main thing that drew me to Elim is that it takes people from the position of advocate to action oriented very easily. That is the thing that has kept me here every year, apart from the fact that this is something we should do. It's the fact that it's such a simple ask. Can you write one letter? And something I love and I want to ask you about when I did the webinar, something that just turned my mind was you are not writing out of charity. This is not a charity. You are writing to somebody who is in a different circumstance than you, that is your equal brother, your equal sister. So you may be the one that gets an outsized benefit from this. And that really resonated with me. I didn't attend this year's webinar, which I know was great. I hope for all the listeners, whoever listens to this, this is an okay enough introduction. I think we just hopped right into it. But tell me more about what this motivation is around. This is not charity, this is solidarity, please.
I love that framing. I think that's something that we hold close at Elam. But I think too, just like this concept of letter writing being that direct action and connecting to from the free world to the incarcerated. I think with a little more contextual framing, you can kind of understand why solidarity in general is so important for the incarcerated, especially as kind of self-claiming abolitionists, because letter writing is kind of a radical act of presence in a system designed to disappear people. And in the machinery of the prison industrial complex, isolation is fully intentional. Prisons are built to sever people from their communities, from memory, from dignity, because a human being cut off from connection is easier to control and forget. And the prison industrial complex, it isolates and silences because its purpose isn't justice, it's control. And so these prisons are existing to neutralize those deemed threats by society, the poor, the working class, Black and brown communities, migrants, those forced to survive at the margins of capitalism. And it's a way to manage people who the empire find inconvenient or dangerous by cutting them off from community, from family, and from support. And it ensures that those inside lose that power to resist, and it erases their humanity. And so then we on the outside then in turn forget that they exist or believe that their suffering is justified. So that isolation is really deliberate. And giving the invisible voiceless population, it makes them easier to exploit or control. That dehumanization that the prison industrial complex so fervently makes possible, makes it easier to justify the harsh conditions, the exploitative labor, the reduced costs associated with incarceration, because these prisons aren't separate from colonialism or capitalism, they're a continuation of them. And the same violence that we see globally from occupation, policing, or surveillance is mirrored here in mass incarceration. And the prison industrial complex is just like a larger system that relies on that racism and that poverty and that oppression to keep the status quo intact and profitable. So through community organizing, through letter writing, it's an act of resistance. It's an act to directly challenge the empire's logic of separation and silence.
You know,
It was long-winded. I don't even think I
I,
answered your question.
I used to be a city dweller, so I used to understand what all of this meant. But the beginning of what you said made me very, very emotional. I'm gonna pause this and let's listen to some music. And I'll keep you on. That was really, really emotional what you said about losing memory, and it hit me. Do you know Fez Ahmed Fez?
I do. I was excited in your prefacing email that you mentioned him.
Let's listen to it now, and we can talk about that. Yeah, I used to be a person that read things and knew things, but now I just kind of sing and live in the suburbs, and so we're just gonna listen to some Fez with Fez. Join me if you don't mind, and we'll come back. And if this thing cuts off, but that was what you said about being cut off from memory. We should just sing and listen to what the songs say. But let's start. We're just coming back from listening to Fez Ahmed Fez's Gulo Mein Rang Bhare Badano Bahar Chale, as Rida opened up talking about, you know, the process of incarceration, how it takes somebody away from everybody, and that this is purposeful. And this reminded me of Fez Ahmed Fez Saab's ghazal from when he was in jail, which I don't know the history of too deeply, but the poetry is beautiful. This is really lovely what you shared, Rida. Miriam, what are your thoughts on this ghazal, and really what we come from, our people, what we come from in Pakistan, and how you call it, like, inqilabi shairi. What are your thoughts, and what is your knowledge so far about these things? Because we come from something that has this in our heritage. This is part of what we came from, but it doesn't always feel like it's in our consciousness.
Yeah, I love that sentiment. I think this is my favorite ghazal of all time. Just because of the way that it can be interpreted both as this poem for love and longing, but also for revolutionary spring. Just like the images of the nature and
Mm.
the renewal of life almost. It's so moving to me. And it's absolutely my favorite. I was giggling so much because you played my absolute
Good,
favorite
good, good, good.
ever.
I'm glad I didn't
Um,
sing it.
no, you hit the nail. But I think too, I mean, this one, it's just so moving to me because when you think of like lines like Gulshan Ka Karobar, you think of like the work of the garden and that. And for me, I mean, I love poetry just as context.
I,
And so much of like classic Persian and Islamic poetry, you have this image of the garden to evoke paradise and love and longing, and then like a sensual defiance. And he's evoking it here too. Um, to show that love in its highest form is not separate from struggle, and that in the soil from which revolution grows, so does love. It's my absolute favorite. So you did wrong bringing it up because I could go on.
wow. Yeah, I actually don't know. I'll listen to the recording to try and understand what you said, but it was it's so beautiful. It reminds me, I take courses. I have taken courses from Alif Seye, who does like basically every Saturday this free poetry thing for probably people like you. And one of the days we were talking about some ghazal, which now I have to text my teacher and ask her that how Fez Saab was talking about in a different ghazal about how revolutionary it is to be just in joy at all, or in,
Mm.
you know, and that's something I took away from that, because oftentimes the Urdu goes over my head, but it seems like you're well aware of like our poetry, where it comes from, and really I'm so glad. Obviously, I found out about Eid letter writing because of my love for Hanif and his artistic, I knew about him way before everyone else, by the way. Like, he's a big deal now, but I've known about him since button poetry. And then I was like, wow, he does this too. And it was so intriguing to me because, I was a uh, young bad poet then. And so I was like, wow, what is this? And so it's kind of and this as you're all, young adult artists and activists, these things can't really be separated. As I've returned back to, like I always say, suburban desi life from a big city, there's such a big disconnect where all of our uncles and aunties who run all the programs and the shows, you'll listen to this every weekend, but nobody will know. Like, nobody will know where it comes from. And one of the things that Elam does a really good job of highlighting is the stigma of maybe desis and Muslims towards those that are incarcerated. This is one of the things we have to grapple with, is that how do we treat our own people that are incarcerated? And you say, oh, they've done something wrong. You know, that's their price to pay. And I'll just tell you right now, I don't know. I don't know, because abolition is a really, really hard thing to understand. The concept of voluntarily saying, I have done wrong to society. Sorry, this is a tangent, but it needs to be said just so you know who I am, as I love to know who you both are. Nobody knows all the answers, but we have to take action. And one of the things about, and if Dostoevsky talks about in Crime and Punishment, this guy at the end, he just goes because he says, I've done wrong. I should go away to Siberia. And that was like the most forgiving thing that could happen to him when the detective finds him and says, go away now. And he says, I want to go away because I feel bad. Maybe it's overly simplistic, but it's been many years. So I'm just saying I don't know all of the answers, but this idea that we have in our society of the stigma that somebody has done wrong and so they should be locked away is something that's that makes it hard for us to have a connection with those. Even though we listen to this poetry all the time, we just don't know. We're like separated, and I think a lot of that has to do with migration. Anyway, I've put a lot out there for at least you to react to.
No, I appreciate all of that. I think it's a good question. It's really affirming to me to know that everything I'm saying is not making sense to you. So thank you so much for making that clear.
That it's not making sense. When I left the city, I started this big project called Stop Being Literate, where I just
Okay.
stopped. So like my
I
whole
think I'm going to join you because honestly, I don't even know I'm just like rambling. And I'd love for Mariam to take heed. If she-
speak more Urdu, speak less English. I'll tell you so briefly. English is a language of precision and utility and
Mhm.
like and paragraphing. Urdu is a language where like you just say less and you say more.
I agree.
That's my passion for today.
I agree.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I mean, I think it's hard for me I like the sentiment of like abolition is large and putting it in simplistic views and terms would make it more digestible um to Muslim communities and Desi communities that I think would be listening, the suburban thing that you've been evoking. But I mean, I think I don't know how to frame it that's not in these
I
big literate words.
I
But just from, I mean, my experience and kind of like what I've conjured up in my head really is that the stigma against incarcerated Muslims and communities, I think, if I were to humbly propose my opinion, comes from more colonial ideas of what mortality and criminality mean, where it should take more grounding and footing from Islam and the Quran itself. Because these colonial systems taught us that surviving poverty and resisting occupation or seeking justice made you a criminal. And I think that framework is forced onto colonial people to break their resistance. Um, and so it's just, in my opinion, completely antithetical to Islam and what our faith teaches us, that standing against oppression is a duty, and that protecting the dignity of the oppressed and refusing to side with tyranny is core to what it means to be a Muslim. And you missed this year's webinar, but that was the main theme is what we can take from the Quran as Muslims that can help us side with the vulnerable and refuse to accept the world as empire leaves it. I think Mariam has so much to say about this as well.
That was really great, or that I really resonate with like your perspectives, especially the ways that like colonial ideologies and like colonial rule intersect with incarceration, right? Um, but to speak about incarceration more broadly and like just the utter like subjugation that if we focus on like the United States, for example, that incarcerated people in the United States face, um we see such high rates of recidivism and not a decrease in crime, yet we see an increase in levels of incarceration and increase in funding for incarceration. So when we look at it from this sort of like with this broader question of like, does incarceration work as a system? Many of the answers and sort of like landmarks to gauge whether that's true tells us that incarceration fails in so many respects. But of course, we are like an Islamic organization, and we take sort of the concept of an ummah very seriously, and that extends to our incarcerated brothers and sisters. I mean, the largest religious group and the largest conversions to a religious group are Muslim and like the Islamic religious group inside prisons for many different reasons. But for me, it's like a marker of increasing my iman to know that people inside feel this like utter sense of belonging and community with Muslims and feel drawn to it so much on the inside that they convert, subhanAllah.
Wow.
Um, but on the basis of, like their religious identity inside, they are persecuted and subjugated. People during Ramadan are barred access to healthy food. They're barred access to breaking their fast and opening their fast at our required times. And many times are prevented from gathering for Jummah on Fridays. So many of like the daily or monthly religious practices that we take for granted in the free world on the outside. And so from that perspective, it's obligatory upon us on the outside to be in solidarity with our incarcerated brothers and sisters in that way. But also to critically analyze incarceration as a system and like mass incarceration as a system broadly within the US when that comes to like a policy lens and like an economic lens. And I think for like average people looking at this really violent system, they can easily pinpoint pinpoint like these cracks and flaws and come to the conclusion that we need something beyond incarceration to really reduce crime and reduce violence in our society.
Hmm. I need to start reading again. So much of what you're saying is like um, these are important things to discuss. A lot of times, by the way, we have 7 minutes left, and I have to respect it at least for now. We may or may not get reconnected. It's very possible for now. This may have to be um, a very fun introduction to each other, and we can always reconnect and keep talking. I'll just say as a tangent, obviously I started working with Elim and trying to broadcast and bring as many people into this as I could because I believe in this. And it's an uphill battle to get people to get excited about it. I don't know social media. I don't know how to work all this stuff, but um, I say that all to say I believe in this. I care to be part of this with you. One of the things that I feel really strongly about is that it's important to use channels to access people that are listening that are not acting. And so the fact that you've even decided to come on today and say, let's talk about it instead of that way we can broadcast and share with people that don't really quite understand. Everybody's working at their desk anyway. They can check in. And so thank you for setting aside the time. I say that to say I am a few years member of this organization along with some leaders in Dallas. Hopefully we can keep this conversation going. There's a lot more to talk about because what's very frankly, I'm Ismaili in our Jamaat Khanas. We have policing in our Jamaat Khanas every time there's a big day. Which I have, to even bridge the conversation of, Uncle, so we have our security teams and so on, to say, Uncle, do we need the police to be part of this whole thing that we do? Is a really hard thing to say because on the blanket of it is like, well, there are people that hate Muslims and so we need protection. And then there's the whole Malcolm thing about people should just have their own community policing, I'm not super well read, but he has like this thing of like, community should protect themselves and they should have arms or whatever they need to have to protect themselves. These are hard conversations to bridge here, to even start here. And I think that they're completely necessary conversations to have because I think that we're in a generation that we all kind of talk like this or we know, but the people that are protecting our mosques, that are interfacing with the police, how do we bring them into these conversations? And so these are things and that's why, very frankly, I think even just saying abolition as a concept is very hard to say to a lot of uncles and aunties here. Like, it just doesn't even make sense. I know that because I've tried, and also I'll just say like people's, well, I'll leave some things for off air, but these are important conversations to start, and so I'm glad that you all have started discussing with me, and we'll figure out. Look, here in Dallas, there's Ghulam Institute, there's Sheikh Abdul Rahman Murphy. There are global imams here that people are looking at in Pakistan, Bangladesh, like in Dallas. And Elim does such important work. Things don't happen overnight. It's not the point. But there are so many people that would do this, and I think it's a matter of how can you stay consistent, stay connected with each other, and build relationships that you don't have to believe in the whole thing to believe in the bare minimum of, I can write a letter this Ramzan to somebody that doesn't have access to communication. That's not a hard step to take. And so I said this when I first joined Elim's call when they were trying to branch out and bring in other cities. I said, I don't think letter writing is a radical act. I'm not a radical. I'm a normal person. I mean, sorry, like I just I just want to write a letter because it makes my heart feel good, and I think a lot of people can relate to that or maybe can understand that. So we're wrapping up on time, and we're definitely going to listen to Humde Kinge once this Zoom ends. And so, Miriam, do you know Humde Kinge? No,
I don't.
I know you don't know Hamde Kingi. That's why I asked. So after the episode's over, get on the Radio Azad app and listen, and call Rida so she can explain to you what it is. It's so beautiful.
That explanation will be so bad.
I don't think it will be. There was a lot about poetry you were saying that I'm like, wow, I don't. There's like a, how do you? There's a Urdu word for how you explain poetry. Do you know what that word is?
No.
Oh, oh. Well, what you were saying about like springtime and resistance and that being heaven itself, I was like, wow, I hadn't thought about it that way. Anyway, Miriam, talk to Rida. She'll explain to you what she knows about Hamde Kingi. This is another Fez revolutionary poem. Okay, I'll explain it. Okay, so basically, there's a really good story that another, I think, Nazm that Fez Sab wrote inside prison called Hamde Kingi, and Zia al-Haq, who I think was the police state dictator at the time, gave a very clear instruction that said, nobody should be reciting this poetry. We don't listen to this poetry. And this was around the time that saris were being outlawed in Pakistan because they were being, because it was becoming, that's what was happening. And so Hamde Kingi, Iqbal Bano is an artist that she recited this. The story is, I can't confirm it, is that there were guns pointed at her when she was reciting this, and they just didn't shoot. They just listened. And there's a crowd of 70,000 people. People just lie. They see just lie. So I don't know what's true or not. But there's a big crowd, and you can hear it in the original recording of people losing their minds. And I don't know if guns are pointed, but she wore this black sari and recited this nazam. And these are stories in our history that a lot of our elders don't know. Like I told this to my mom. I was like, Mom, this is an amazing nazam. And this is what I think is part of the work, is to revive in people's consciousness that we don't just have to be like going to our gas stations, which we own, and like doing our thing and being always abiding. There can be like a cultural sense of resistance. That's an angle that is very clear to you all by now. I take, and in our next conversation, which we have to talk about drum, in the case study of drum, which is so interesting because it talks about surveillance and there's an essay that I read when I used to be able to read about how policing takes these really noxious forms. And so next time when we talk about policing and desis and suburbs, we'll definitely discuss that. This is going to kick us off in a minute. So what are your last thoughts?
I thought this was like a really great session to get to know one another and a really like great and like unexpected, which I guess I should have expected it, like South Asian cultural rooting, which I really appreciate. And like I find myself not in a lot of those spaces. So I really appreciate that in this conversation, as well as just like the different topics we touched on.
Thank you. What are the last words? It doesn't have to be praise. It can just be what, yeah.
Thank you. I appreciated this a lot. And I look forward to another
Me
conversation. There's
too.
a lot more to talk about.
Isn't there? Okay, this is great. I'll email you and we can touch base.
Sounds good.
Peace. Allah Hafiz.